The House Committee on Oversight and Accountability has serious concerns about the potential impact of a new Biden EPA rule on our domestic energy production. They're worrying that it favors an extreme green agenda over reliability in America's energy grid. A lot of House GOP members are signing off on this one, more than we usually see. And if we go all the way down to the bottom of this document, we'll notice who is on board. Normally, when we go through these filings, there's just a couple of names on here, one or two. But they really pass this one around because it's a serious issue. It involves power. It involves America's energy grid. And a lot of Americans are concerned about this as prices skyrocket. We've got questions about reliability. We have brownouts going on in various states like California. They can't keep the power on. We've got issues even in places like Texas where there was a cold freeze and their grid was stressed out. And so we start to wonder, is it so prudent to make all of these massive changes over to this new utopian vision of a green world where we really know that's not necessarily about saving the planet? That's only the front stage sale. They come out, we're going to save the planet. In reality, it's about moving infrastructure. It's about moving contracts, divesting old power into new power that the Democratic Party controls that gives them a lot more power, literally in terms of what they can do to keep a citizenry compliant under new constraints in this new green world energy paradigm. So this letter comes out from James Comer, chairman on the Oversight and Accountability Committee. It goes directly to Michael Regan over with the EPA, and they give us a big title of a new policy that is a proposed rule from the EPA. And this is where this stuff gets very pernicious because Biden just comes in. He has an overarching mandate, he believes, to reshape America however he wants. And because he controls the EPA, and because he has very little regard for constitutional limitations, and because our Congress is so weak and feckless that they don't push back when he makes changes like this, he just goes and writes a new rule. And the rule goes into effect, and it is a catastrophe all across America. This rule that came out from EPA would set new emission standards for fossil-fueled power plants. Footnote 1, they tell us it literally comes from the EPA, and you can reference the document here. Federal regulations, May 23rd, 2023 is the proposed rule. Now we have a typical government title here. It's called The New Source Performance Standards for Greenhouse Gas Emissions from New Modified and Reconstructed Fossil-Fueled Electric Generating Units, Emissions Guidelines for Greenhouse Gas Emissions from Existing Fossil Fuel-Fired Electric Generating Units, and Repeal of the Affordable Clean Energy Rule. Woo! How many bureaucrats did it take to write that title? A lot. I don't know. Probably a whole team of people over there at the EPA. Now, they're going to call this the new emissions rule, the NSPS. We'll just call it the new emissions rule. Is just one in a series of rulemaking actions that your agency has taken to encumber reliable domestic energy production in favor of advancing Biden's radical green agenda. We recognize, says Congress, the importance of working to maintain air quality and reduce greenhouse gas emissions, and we understand the need to make technology investments to achieve that goal. But while the section of the Clean Air Act allows the EPA, your government, to develop new emission standards when appropriate, it also says that you have to consider whether those standards are achievable at a reasonable cost and determine if this is required and whether the technology required for compliance has been adequately demonstrated. So can we do this at a reasonable cost? And is the technology sufficient? You can't just govern by fiat. The proposed rule fails to meet these criteria. So in other words, there are procedures and rules that the Biden administration and the EPA have to comply with in order to get this done. They have failed to go through those mechanics. And so this standard is not appropriate. They tell us the proposed rule hinges on the forced adoption of carbon capture. This is carbon capture and storage infrastructure. They say this is not tested. One example, in a 681-page report, you guys used a facility that was shut down after they had persistent mechanical failures with their carbon capture infrastructure. And where this capture has been implemented, it actually achieves much lower rates of capture than those required by the proposed standards. Regardless of the potential to capture carbon in the future, they're in early stages and they're not appropriate for use. The technology and infrastructure will also be very cost prohibitive to many power plants. So in other words, it's not going to be financially feasible for the plants to retrofit their facilities. They're going to be forced to shut down, which is really the whole point of all of this. So by changing these little rules, they get to shut down entire oppositional institutions. Plants that have access to the capital needed to adopt this will be obligated to capture and store 90% of their emissions by 2035. The EPA proposed standards are a thinly veiled effort to achieve de facto closures of existing coal and natural gas power plants. They know that they're not going to be able to afford it or comply with the rule, but they don't care. This administration's energy and environmental agenda has consistently come at a high cost to our nation's energy security, and this rule continues that trajectory. Now, they're serious about this. They say, look, it is difficult to overstate the threat that the proposed performance standards pose to grid reliability in the United States. If the proposed rule went into effect, it would have the strongest impact on power plants supplying baseload power to the electric grid. Just weeks ago, a commission from the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission characterized the rate of domestic power plant retirements as a, quote, reliability crisis. Natural gas and coal-fired plants comprise the largest sources of energy generation worldwide. Nearly 20% of domestic power comes from coal. 40% of existing output in the U.S. comes from gas, natural gas. Over the past 2 years, millions of Americans have felt the crushing weight of rising utility bills as a direct result of this administration's assault on domestic energy production. At a time of nationwide calls for increased electrification, the EPA's knowingly decreasing generating capacity is a textbook bait and switch to American consumers. And this is the type of stuff that hits everybody across the board. And this is not discussed in Congress. This is just done by executive fiat through executive order. They tell us that the United States produces the cleanest, most affordable energy in the world. Over the past decade and a half, the growth of natural gas production alone has lowered greenhouse gas emissions to 1980s levels. This administration must focus more on keeping the lights on for America and less on antagonizing reliable power. To sacrifice affordable energy, national security, global competitiveness would be unacceptable trade-offs for marginal emissions reductions the EPA is projecting. We strongly urge the EPA to consider industries and other public input on the cost, the feasibility, the adverse impacts of this overreaching policy, and we reiterate Congress to extend the comment period for a new proposed source performance standards all the way out to 60 days. To assist this committee, please give us the following information. All documents between the EPA, the White House, and everybody talking about the standards, all documents about how this new rule would impact grid reliability and security, all documents and communications about the cost of fossil fuel generated electricity, the impacts on the costs that people will pay, all documents between the EPA and the White House. Send them over our direction. If you have any questions, let us know, but we've got authority to investigate this. We're Congress. And this has been signed by, as we referenced, a big swath of Congress, including some people who are chairmen and chairwomen of various committees throughout the House. So it's a very interesting thing that's happening, and power is critical, and we've often talked about various ideas and why the government may have a vested interest in controlling power, because if they can increase power, they can encourage you to use less without passing any rules or any limitations. You just use less because you have less money, because you're spending it all on electricity, and you're doing so in the name of green energy, even though their technology is less reliable, less competitive, arguably less green than the current industries in place. But it's about a capital shift from one sector to another. It's about a political shift, empowering one new industry, disempowering another industry. And as we know, these people will gobble up every single ounce of power they have. No pun intended on that. And one way to do that is by taking over the power grid. So Congress is pounding the table on this. Biden administration very likely to barrel forward with this. And so we'll keep our eye on it.